Steve Bellavin. Just caution to people not to assume too much technical sophistication some of the time, or sometimes a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. I was working with the FBI in one particular case, and guys, we're pretty sure we've got steganography involved. And I've never seen any confirmed cases of this out in the wild. So, gee, it might be interesting. I'd take a look at it. You know how some Microsoft parts, when they write out files, don't bother clearing the empty buffers first in Word and so on? That's what they confused with steganography. It was not. It was just, this is Word at its finest.
Also, don't assume too much depth and technical knowledge on your lawyer's part.
John Larson, you started the talk by saying that the internet would be secure when human nature changed. I thought it was interesting that you put a maybe on could interception be made secure, and I don't understand why the same argument would apply there.
I was trying to be optimistic, but my fear is that we'll get if we don't have a standard for intercept, then we get some security through obscurity, which, as much as us pure security people like to sneer at that, there's something to be said there. If every intercept's an ad hoc kludge, then at least there's no one common way that you can, thwart every intercept. But if we design standards for it, my fear is that those standards will be driven by requirements to being insecure. And I would argue very strongly. And I might add, years ago we had the IETF got involved in this issue of should we, be worrying about wiretap and should we be doing standards for wiretap? And the consensus was pretty strongly into no, we're not going to do that. But at the other hand, if we as engineers do this in an open forum, whether it's the IETF or another forum, there's a chance that we actually might be able to do it more secure than if it was done by 3 vendors and 5 law enforcement agencies behind closed doors.
So, Todd Underwood. There was a recent report that detailed the number of wiretap requests in the United States and the number of them that had been refused by a judge, and the number that had been refused was 0. And I don't recall the number of requests, but it was large, but it wasn't as large as I had thought it would be. Interested in comments on that, because there's this theory that I think lots of us operate under, that wiretap requests need to be approved by a judge. And if wiretap requests are always approved by a judge, regardless of the amount of evidence, regardless of a history of lying of the agents, I'm not sure where we end up.
Well, let me make a comment on that. I mean, in theory, actually Pat Felstrom had a great line in his signature file for a while, which was, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. And in theory of government is that we have checks and balances, and judges only sign orders when it's appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is what protects our privacy is that doing intercepts is expensive, and it's the cost of doing them that acts as the check and balance, because even law enforcement agencies have to operate within a limited budget. And if an intercept, I think at one point I remember hearing that a wiretap typically costs $50,000 to execute on average. And if a wiretap costs you $50,000 and you don't have infinite money, then you're going to ration them out to the cases where you're going to get the most, value out of them. And one of my fears is if we standardize interception and we make it cheap, then rather than being a last resort, because we actually read the statutes that talks about it being a last resort, it will become the first resort and preferred resort, because it will become the cheapest way of doing things. And so that's always something to keep in mind. We may believe our civics classes about how governments work, but at the end of the day, what really protects us is the difficulty of doing invasive things. And so there's an argument there that we shouldn't make it any easier.
Still have time?
Sure.
This is Bill Manning. Lawful intercept and hunting down the perp, basically what you're talking about is not security, but anonymity. We lose, so if people are anonymous on the net, it becomes much harder to find them, hunt them down, and prosecute them for whatever the evils they're doing. Is that the idea of security, or are we talking about encryption? Or security is really a broad term, and I'd like you to clarify what you mean here.
Well, unfortunately, the answer is all of the above. If I'm choosing to be anonymous on the network, then presumably I don't want somebody piercing that anonymity. If I'm not anonymous, but I'm communicating private information, I'd like that information to only be shared between myself and the people I'm sending it to. It's basically, there's this concept in the United States of expectation of privacy. I have an expectation of privacy. When I send an email to my mother, I expect that only my mother is reading that email, or maybe my father. But the idea is that third parties on the path aren't getting their jollies reading my email. Now that's got nothing to do with anonymity. On the other hand, it can involve anonymity if I'm communicating, say, in a news group and saying things anonymously. I don't want that anonymity to be randomly violated. And so, unfortunately, the answer is all of the above. We, by the way, have a bellwether at MIT that I've been watching, and that is we operate through our Lab for Computer Science an anonymous mail forwarding service. And it is truly anonymous, and it has survived every legal attack. Meaning we've had people show up with court orders saying, there's a guy who's using the user ID, I don't want to say any real ones, foobar at nim.alias.net, and we want you to tell us who they are. And we can't. Technologically, we don't have that. I mean, we have all this encrypted goop, and we give them the encrypted goop, but it doesn't do them any good that I'm aware of. In fact, in one case, I probably shouldn't talk about that. We got a subpoena. I love my lawyers. They're really good lawyers. The lawyer says, is the person who this is going after a student? Because we have all sorts of special laws about students. And I said, I have no way of knowing because I can't tell. So then the lawyer says, might it be a student? And I said, it might be a student. He says, well, then we can't use the subpoena. It has to be a court order to get around the Family Education Records Protection Act. So we went back to the guys and we said, the subpoena is not going to cut it because it might be a student. Therefore, you need this court order. By the way, if you go to the court and you get this court order, which I know is not an easy thing for you to do right now, what we're going to give you is a bunch of encrypted goop. And so they didn't bother. And so I'm using this service. The day that we are forced to shut it down will be a dark day on the internet.
Well, the point being that once upon a time, someone told me that if you want something kept private, don't put it on the net. As soon as it goes on the net, assume that it's not private. And that advice has seemed to hold me in good stead over the years. So I'm assuming that as soon as I put it on the net, somebody somewhere is going to want to examine those bits for their personal enjoyment.
Certainly, that's a safe strategy, though you can never control what others might send you.
Break time. We return in 1/2 an hour. I don't care if we have another talk. I want a break.
Thank you.